The moon had abandoned the sky that night, leaving nothing but darkness thick as spilled ink across the Colorado mountains. Jedediah Raleigh sat alone in his cabin, the amber glow of a single oil lamp casting long shadows against walls that had witnessed half a decade of silence. A bottle of whiskey stood on the table before him, half empty, same as it had been for 3 days now. He had stopped counting the drinks long ago, stopped counting the days too. Out here, time moved like molasses in winter, slow and meaningless to a man who had buried his reasons for living beneath a cottonwood tree on the hill behind the barn. His Colt Peacemaker lay within arm's reach. It always did. Not because he feared intruders, but because a man alone in the wilderness learned to keep death close, like an old friend who might visit without warning. The wind howled through the pines outside, carrying with it the first bite of autumn frost. Winter would come early this year. Jed could feel it in his bones, in the old wound on his shoulder that never quite healed right after Antietam. 15 years since that hellish day, and his body still remembered every moment of it. He raised the glass to his lips when he heard it, a sound that did not belong to the wind or the forest, the soft crunch of footsteps on dried leaves, human footsteps, careful and deliberate, approaching from the east. Jed's hand moved to the Colt before his mind could form a thought. He rose slowly, years of cavalry training flowing through muscles that had never forgotten how to survive. The lamp he extinguished with one breath, plunging the cabin into darkness. His eyes adjusted quickly, pupils drinking in what little starlight crept through the gaps in the shutters. He moved to the door, pressing his back against the wall, pistol raised. The footsteps stopped. Whoever stood outside knew they had been heard. A long moment passed. Then a voice, clear and steady despite its obvious exhaustion, cut through the silence. "I need shelter. One night. I leave at dawn." A woman's voice, speaking English with an accent that marked her immediately as native, likely Cheyenne based on the inflection. Jed's jaw tightened. Every instinct forged by years of frontier living told him to stay silent, to wait until she moved on. Taking in a Cheyenne woman now, with tensions running high after the summer's conflicts, was inviting trouble through his front door. But something in that voice stopped him. Not fear, not desperation. Something else entirely. A dignity that refused to break, even when asking for help. He pulled open the door. She stood in the darkness before him, and even in the faint starlight, he could see she had walked through hell to reach this place. Her buckskin dress was torn in several places, dark stains that could only be dried blood marking the fabric. A gash across her forehead had scabbed over, but still looked raw. Yet she stood straight, shoulders back, chin raised. The posture of someone who had lost everything, but refused to lose herself. Their eyes met across the threshold, and Jed felt something shift in his chest. He had seen that look before. In the mirror every morning for years. The look of a soul hollowed out by grief, holding together through nothing but stubborn will. "Come inside," he heard himself say. But the knife stays outside. She did not argue or hesitate. Her hand moved to her belt, drawing out a blade with a bone handle worn smooth by generations of use. She placed it on the wooden boards of the porch with a gentleness that suggested it meant more to her than just a weapon. Then she stepped inside, and Jed closed the door against the night. He relit the lamp, and in its glow, he saw her more clearly now. She was younger than he had first guessed, perhaps 27 or 28. High cheekbones.
"You should leave before dawn. Those guys will come back."
I've run long enough. This time, I choose to stay and face them.
Caught the light, and her dark eyes held a depth that seemed to carry centuries of sorrow. Beautiful, yes, but in the way a thunderstorm was beautiful, all power and danger and raw elemental force. "Ayana," she said, offering her name without being asked. "It means eternal blossom." My father had a sense of humor. Jed gestured toward the table. "Sit. There is bread and water. Nothing fancy." She sat across from him, moving with the careful economy of someone conserving what little strength remained. When he placed the bread before her, she ate slowly, deliberately, not with the desperate hunger of starvation, but with the measured control of someone who had learned that survival meant rationing everything, even hope. "You speak English well," Jed observed, settling into his own chair, the Colt now resting on the table between them. Trading posts near the Yellowstone, she replied between bites. My father believed in knowing the enemy's tongue. He said words could be weapons too, if you learned to use them right. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was. The past tense hung in the air like gun smoke after a battle. She set down the bread, her appetite apparently fled. 4 days ago, my village was attacked, not soldiers, militia, private men with new rifles and old hatred. Jed listened in silence as she continued, her voice steady but her hands betraying her, fingers pressed flat against the table, as if anchoring herself to something solid. My father was a medicine man, a healer. He was treating the wounded when they found him. She paused, and in that pause, Jed heard everything she could not bring herself to say. He pushed me into a ravine, told me to run. That was the last thing he ever said to me. The lamp flickered, casting dancing shadows across her face. In that moment, Jed saw not a Cheyenne woman, not a stranger, not a problem to be solved. He saw grief wearing human skin, the same grief he wore every day like a coat he could never remove. How many survived? He asked quietly. I do not know. Perhaps none. They sat in silence then, two people carved hollow by loss, sharing space in a cabin that suddenly felt less empty than it had in years. Outside, the wind continued its mournful song through the pines. When dawn began to gray the eastern sky, Ayanna rose to leave. But as she moved toward the door, Jed spoke. Wait. He retrieved the bone-handled knife from the porch and held it out to her. She looked at him with surprise, then understanding. You will need this, he said simply. There were tracks around my property yesterday morning. Fresh. Riders scouting the area. They are looking for something. I suspect that something is you. Ayanna took the knife, sliding it back into her belt with practiced ease. Then I will draw them away from here. This is not your fight, Mr. Raleigh. You have shown me kindness. I will not repay it by bringing death to your door. Jed studied her for a long moment. Every practical bone in his body screamed at him to let her go, to return to his bottle and his silence, and his slow march toward a grave beside his wife and daughter. But something else stirred beneath those practical bones. Something he thought had died when he buried Sarah and Emma, and apparently had only been sleeping. You know how to shoot? He asked. I can learn. He crossed to the cabinet by the fireplace, pulling out his spare Colt and a box of ammunition. Then I guess you are staying a while longer. At least until we figure out who those men work for and what they really want. Ayanna's expression shifted, surprise breaking through her careful mask for just a moment. Why? You do not know me. Your people have spent generations trying to destroy mine. Why would you risk your life for a woman you met hours ago? Jed considered the question, turning it over in his mind like a stone in his palm. The honest answer was complicated, tangled up in memories of Sarah's smile and Emma's laughter and the empty years that followed. But the simple answer was this: because I have spent too long waiting to die, and that gets tiresome after a while. He placed the pistol on the table before her. First lesson starts after breakfast.
Breathe slowly. Don't pull the trigger. Squeeze gently.
What if I miss?
Then shoot again. Survival doesn't require perfection.
2 weeks passed, and in that time, the cabin transformed from a tomb into something else entirely. Not a home. Exactly. Neither of them was ready for that word, but a shelter that held two souls instead of one. And somehow the weight of all that emptiness felt lighter when shared. Ayanna's wounds healed faster than Jed expected. The gash on her forehead was mostly superficial, and her exhaustion had been born of flight rather than serious injury. By the end of the first week, she moved with fluid grace again. By the second, she had mastered the Colt well enough to hit a tin can at 40 yards with consistency that would shame half the soldiers Jed had served with. But it was the other lessons that surprised him more. She knew plants he had walked past 1,000 times without noticing, knew which roots could reduce fever and which leaves could stop bleeding. When she examined the old wound on his shoulder, the one that had ached for 15 years through every winter, her fingers found knots in the muscle he had not known existed. The bullet tore deeper than the army doctors realized, she said, working a poultice of wild herbs into the scarred tissue. The flesh healed around the damage. No wonder it pains you. Can you fix it? I can ease it. My father could have fixed it completely. I am still learning his ways. She spoke of her father often, always in the past tense, always with that same steady voice that refused to crack no matter how heavy the words. Medicine Eagle had been his name, a healer of considerable skill among the Cheyenne bands. He had taught Ayana everything he knew, preparing her to carry the knowledge forward to the next generation, a generation that might no longer exist. On the 14th night, they sat beside the hearth as had become their custom, the warmth pushing back the autumn chill that had settled over the mountains. Jed found himself talking more than he had in years, telling her about Sarah's smile that could light up a room, about Emma's first steps and the way she would laugh when he threw her in the air. The fever took them both in the same week, he said, staring into the coals. I was in town fetching medicine when Sarah passed. By the time I got back, Emma had followed her. They were buried before I could say goodbye. Ayana listened without interrupting, without offering hollow comfort or empty platitudes. She simply listened, and in that listening, Jed felt something loosen in his chest, a knot he had carried so long he had forgotten it was there. You blame yourself, she said finally. It was not a question. Every single day. My father used to say that guilt is a weight that warms nothing and crushes everything. He said we can honor the dead by living fully, or we can join them by dying slowly while still breathing. She turned to face him, the glow painting bronze across her features. Which have you been doing, Mr. Raleigh? The question struck him like a fist, unexpected and bruising. He opened his mouth to answer, found he had no words, and closed it again. Ayana rose then, moving to sit across from him with a deliberateness that caught his attention. She did not kneel or bow or diminish herself in any way. She sat as an equal, her gaze meeting his without flinching. I have something to say, she began. A proposal, not a request. A proposal between two people who have nothing left to lose. Jed waited, suddenly aware of his heart beating faster than it had any right to. I do not ask for pity, she continued. I do not need rescue. But you need someone beside you, and I need a place to belong. Let me stay, not as a servant, not as a burden, but as an ally, a partner in whatever comes next. Partner, Jed repeated, testing the word. I will give you what no white woman can, not because they lack the will, but because they were never taught. I will be your shadow in the light, your warmth in the cold darkness. When you fall, I will lift you. When you fight, I will stand beside you. Not as a wife, not as property, as a spirit walking the same path. She paused, and in that pause, Jed saw the courage it took to speak those words, to offer herself not as a desperate refugee, but as a force of nature choosing her own destiny. The world will judge us, he said quietly. A white man and a Cheyenne woman. They will not understand. The words of small men are ashes in the wind, Ayana replied. What matters is the warmth we carry inside, whether we let it burn bright or let it fade to nothing. Before Jed could respond, the sound of approaching horses shattered the moment. He was on his feet instantly, Winchester in hand, moving to the window. Through the gap in the shutters, he counted 5 riders emerging from the tree line. The man in
I said goodbye to my wife and children on the hill behind the stables.
You didn't leave them behind, you just took them with you in a different way.
No one has ever told me that before.
front wore a long duster coat and sat his horse with the easy arrogance of someone accustomed to violence. Cass Delaney, Jed muttered, works for a mining company out of Denver. Nothing good comes when he shows up. Ayana had already taken position by the back window, the pistol he had given her held steady in both hands. The woman who had stumbled to his door 2 weeks ago looking like death itself now stood ready to fight like a warrior born. Jed stepped onto the porch, Winchester cradled but ready, as Delaney brought his horse to a stop 20 yards from the cabin. Mr. Raleigh, Delaney called out, his voice carrying the false friendliness of a rattlesnake before it strikes. Colonel Slade sends his regards. We are looking for a Cheyenne woman, young, probably wounded. Seen anyone matching that description? Cannot say I have. Delaney smiled, the expression never reaching his cold eyes. Funny thing is, we tracked footprints to within a mile of here before the rain washed them out, and you are the only dwelling in these parts. Lots of wildlife in these mountains. Could have been anything. Could have been. Delaney shifted in his saddle, his hand moving to rest on the pistol at his hip. Colonel Slade also wanted me to mention that he is expanding his mining operations in this region. Your property sits right in the middle of his planned route. He is prepared to make you a generous offer. Not interested in selling? Perhaps you should hear the offer before deciding. Perhaps you should leave my property before I decide to start shooting. The smile faded from Delaney's face, replaced by something harder and more honest. We will be back, Mr. Raleigh, and next time, we will not be asking so politely. He wheeled his horse around and led his men back toward the tree line. Jed watched them go, his grip on the Winchester never loosening until they had disappeared among the pines. That night, Ayanna told him the rest of the truth. My father discovered a silver deposit on our land, she said, her voice heavy with the weight of what that discovery had cost. He tried to keep it secret, but someone in the village betrayed us, sold the information to the mining company. Slade Mining, Jed said, the pieces falling into place. They did not attack us because we were Cheyenne. They attacked us to eliminate witnesses, to claim land that held more value than they could count. She moved to the window, staring out at the darkness beyond. Your land sits on the path to the deposit. They would have come for you eventually, whether I was here or not. I simply gave them an excuse to come sooner. Jed absorbed this, the reality of it settling into his bones. This was not about Ayanna. It never had been. This was about silver and greed and the endless hunger of men who saw the land as nothing more than something to be consumed. So what do we do? He asked. Ayanna turned to face him, and in her expression, he saw something that looked almost like hope. We fight, together, the way it was meant to be. They came at dawn, as Jed knew they would. The morning mist still clung to the valley floor when the first riders appeared on the ridge overlooking his property. He counted 9 of them this time, Delaney at the front, and beside him, a man whose silver-streaked beard and military bearing marked him as Colonel Lucius Slade himself. The colonel had come to witness the conquest personally. Jed had spent 3 days preparing, windows reinforced with thick planks, firing positions established at every angle, ammunition distributed throughout the cabin. He was outgunned and outnumbered, facts he accepted with the calm of a man who had already made peace with death and found it did not frighten him anymore. What surprised him was discovering that he wanted to live. Not merely survive, not simply endure until the final darkness came. He wanted to live, to see another sunrise, to hear Ayanna's voice as she spoke of her father and her people and the knowledge she carried like precious cargo. Somewhere in the past 2 weeks, without his permission or awareness, hope had crept back into his heart. The riders began their descent toward the cabin. Remember what I taught you, Jed said, taking position by the front window. Steady breaths. Squeeze, do not pull, and stay away from the window.
If things get worse, run! Don't look back!
No, I'm not going anywhere.
Why?
Because today, I'm not fighting alone.
Until you are ready to shoot. Ayanna nodded from her position by the back door, the pistol steady in her grip. The fear he might have expected was absent from her face. In its place was something fiercer, a warrior's resolve that would have made her ancestors proud. Slade's voice rang out across the clearing. Mr. Raleigh, this is your final opportunity to resolve this matter peacefully. Send out the woman and sign the deed, and you have my word no harm will come to you. Jed's response was to chamber around in his Winchester. The first shot came from Delaney's men, a wild attempt to shatter the front window. Jed answered with precision, dropping the shooter from his horse before the echo of his own rifle had faded. The battle had begun. What followed was chaos measured in heartbeats and gunfire. Jed worked the Winchester with mechanical efficiency, 15 years of military training flowing through his hands without conscious thought. Another rider fell, then a third, their bodies crumpling to the ground as their horses scattered in panic. From the back of the cabin came the sharp crack of Ayanna's pistol. A scream of pain told him she had found her mark. Pride swelled in his chest, quickly suppressed as survival demanded his full attention. Smoke began to curl beneath the back door. They were trying to burn them out. They started a blaze, Ayanna called, already moving to combat it with the water barrel they had positioned for exactly this purpose. But the diversion had served its purpose. In the chaos of the spreading smoke, 3 of Slade's men had circled around, finding the root cellar entrance that Jed had hoped they would not discover. The first came up through the floor like a demon rising from the earth, pistol raised. Ayanna was faster. She fired twice, both shots finding their mark, the man collapsing before he could squeeze his trigger. But the second attacker was already through, lunging at her with a knife that gleamed in the dim light. They crashed together, struggling for control of the blade. Jed could not help her. 2 more men were at his windows now, and turning his back meant certain death. He heard her cry out, not in fear but in fury, and then the wet sound of a blade finding flesh. When he risked a glance, Ayanna stood over her attacker's body, her father's bone-handled knife in her hand, blood running down her arm from a shallow cut. "I am all right," she gasped. "Finish them." The battle had devolved into a siege. Slade had lost more than half his men, but still commanded the advantage of numbers. He could wait them out, let the spreading smoke do his work for him. Then Slade made his mistake. "Stop shooting!" the colonel bellowed, stepping forward from his covered position. "Raleigh, the woman knows something I need. I am prepared to offer terms. Her life for the information, and you walk away from this with your skin intact." Jed understood immediately. Slade needed Ayanna alive. The location of the silver deposit existed only in her memory, passed down from her father, and if she died, that knowledge died with her. This was leverage he had not expected to have. "Come and get her yourself, Colonel," Jed called back. "If you have got the spine for it." Slade's face contorted with rage. He had not risen to his position by accepting challenges from homesteaders, but neither could he back down in front of his remaining men. The colonel drew his pistol and began walking toward the cabin, Delaney flanking him. Jed stepped onto the porch, Winchester aimed squarely at Slade's chest. Behind him, he heard Ayanna move to the doorway, covering Delaney. "That is far enough." For a long moment, the 4 of them stood frozen in a deadly standoff. 2 men and a woman against a colonel and his hired killer. The fate of all of them balanced on a razor's edge. Then Slade's eyes shifted, looking past Jed, looking at Ayanna. The colonel's hand moved with the speed of a striking snake, his pistol swinging toward the doorway where Ayanna stood. Jed did not think. He simply moved, his body twisted, placing himself between the gun and Ayanna. The shot cracked across the morning air, and white-hot agony exploded through his chest. He felt himself falling, the Winchester slipping from his fingers, the world tilting sideways as the ground rushed up to meet him. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard Ayanna scream. Not in fear, in rage. 2 more shots split the air. Then silence. Jed lay on his back, staring up at the gray Colorado sky, feeling warmth spread across his chest. Not the warmth of comfort, the warmth of blood pooling beneath him, soaking into the wooden planks of his porch. Ayanna's face appeared above him, her features twisted with an emotion he could not name. Her hands pressed against his chest, trying to stem the flow that seemed determined to carry his life away. "Do not you dare," she hissed, her voice breaking for the first time since he had known her. "Do not you dare leave me. You do not have permission to die." He tried to speak, found his mouth full of copper, and managed only a weak cough. "Slade," he whispered. "Dead." Delaney ran. Her hands never stopped moving, tearing strips from her dress, packing the wound with desperate efficiency. "Now stop talking and let me work." The world began to fade at the edges, darkness creeping in from all sides. Jed felt himself drifting, floating towards something vast and peaceful and final. Then pain, sharp and bright and furious, dragging him back from the edge. Ayanna had pressed something into the wound, some herb or root that burned like a branding iron. He gasped, his back arching, consciousness snapping back into focus with brutal clarity. "Stay with me," she commanded, her voice the only anchor in a sea of agony. "You promised me you wanted to live. Prove it." The hours that followed blurred together into a haze of pain and fever, and the constant presence of Ayanna's hands. She worked through the day and into the night, drawing on every scrap of knowledge her father had passed down. Poultices and tinctures and techniques handed down through generations of healers, now focused on keeping one stubborn man alive. 3 times Jed felt himself slipping away. 3 times her voice called him back. You are my shadow in the light, she whispered during the darkest hour. When his breathing had grown so shallow, she had to press her ear to his lips to hear it. And I am your warmth in the darkness. I made a promise, Jedediah Raleigh. I do not break my promises. On the third day, his fever broke. He woke to find her sitting beside his bed, her face gaunt with exhaustion, dark circles carved beneath her eyes. She had not slept, he realized. Not once in 3 days. You look terrible, he croaked. The laugh that escaped her was half sob, half relief. You should see yourself. He tried to rise, felt the wound in his chest protest violently, and settled back against the pillow. Slade is dead. Very dead. Along with 6 of his men. Delaney and 2 others escaped. They will talk. Bring more trouble. I know. She reached out, her hand finding his with a gentleness that seemed impossible from someone who had just spent 3 days fighting death itself. That is why we need to leave. As soon as you can travel. Jed nodded slowly, the movement sending fresh waves of pain through his chest. But beneath the pain, something else stirred. Something warm and stubborn and very much alive. You saved me, he said quietly. When I took that bullet, I was ready to die. Would have been easy, peaceful even, but you would not let me go. Ayana's grip tightened on his hand. I told you I would be your warmth in the darkness. I do not speak empty words. No. He met her eyes, seeing in them a reflection of everything he had lost and everything he might yet find. No, you do not. 2 weeks later, Jed was strong enough to walk short distances. The wound would scar badly, and he would carry the ache of it for whatever years remained to him. But he would carry it alive, breathing, present in a world he had been ready to abandon. On the morning they planned to leave, he led Ayana up the hill behind the barn, to the place where 2 wooden crosses marked the graves of Sarah and Emma Raleigh. He had not visited this spot since the day he buried them, unable to face the reality of what lay beneath that cold earth. Ayana waited as he stood before the graves, his hat in his hands, searching for words he had never been able to find. Sarah, he finally said, his voice rough with emotions too long suppressed. Emma, there is someone I want you to meet. He gestured for Ayana to join him, and she stepped forward, standing at his side before the 2 simple markers. This is Ayana. She saved my life. More ways than one. I know you would have liked her, Sarah. She has your stubbornness. And Emma, sweetheart, she knows stories about the stars that would have made you laugh. He paused, his throat tight, then continued. I am not replacing you. Could never do that, not in 1,000 years. But I am done dying by inches, done waiting for the grave to take me. I think that is what you would have wanted, for me to live, really live, instead of just existing until the end. Ayana knelt and placed a bundle of wildflowers between the 2 crosses, a gesture of respect, not jealousy, an acknowledgement of those who had come before. I will watch over him, she said softly, not to take your place, to continue what you started, to give him reasons to see another sunrise. They stood together in silence as the morning light spilled across the hillside, painting the graves in shades of gold and amber. Somewhere in the pines, a bird began to sing. Montana, Jed said finally. Big territory up there. Open land. Fewer people asking questions about a white man traveling with a Cheyenne woman. You want to start over? I want to live. He turned to face her, this woman who had stumbled onto his porch half dead and proceeded to drag him back from the brink of his own grave. And I want you beside me when I do. Ayana smiled, the expression transforming her face, chasing away the shadows that had lived there since the massacre of her people. Then we ride north. They left that afternoon, 2 horses carrying everything they owned, which was not much. The cabin grew smaller behind them until it disappeared entirely, swallowed by the vast wilderness that had witnessed so much pain, and finally, perhaps, something like redemption. Jed did not look back. There was nothing left for him there except ghosts, and ghosts belonged to the past. The future lay ahead, uncertain and dangerous and alive with possibility. Beside him, Ayana rode with her head high, her father's knife at her belt, her eyes fixed on the northern horizon. She had lost everything and found something she never expected, a place to belong, not by blood, but by choice. And Jed Raleigh, the man who had spent years waiting to die, finally understood what it meant to live, not the absence of death, not mere survival, but the choice made fresh each morning to greet the sunrise and face whatever it brought, to stand beside someone who saw him clearly and chose to stay anyway, to carry warmth through the darkness, not just for himself, but for another soul who needed it just as badly. They rode north, toward Montana, toward whatever future awaited them there. Two broken people who had found in each other the strength to become whole. Two spirits walking the same path. Two hearts carrying the same quiet truth, that even in the deepest darkness, there is always the possibility of light. And sometimes the ones who save us are the ones we least expect.
The story leaves a profound lesson about human choices when faced with loss, hatred, and despair. Both main characters are individuals who have had almost everything taken from them. A man who survived the war, lost his wife and children, and is buried in solitude. A woman who lost her nation, family, and homeland to the greed and violence of others. They meet not in happiness, but in a moment when both are very close to death. Therefore, what they give each other is not a rosy salvation, but a reason to continue existing. The greatest lesson of the story lies in the fact that living is not about having a beating heart, but about choosing to move towards the light. The man lived for many years in a state of waiting to die, letting pain gnaw at him day by day. But when confronted with another person also consumed by darkness, he was forced to choose, to continue turning his back on the world, or to emerge from the spiritual grave he himself had dug. His choice to protect, fight, and ultimately to live not for himself but for others shows that sometimes hope doesn't come from within us, but is awakened when we become a pillar of support for someone else. For the woman, the lesson is that dignity is not destroyed by loss. Despite experiencing massacre, betrayal, and persecution, she did not lose herself, did not beg for pity, and did not accept being the weak. She chose to stand as an equal, an ally, not a burden. This shows that true strength lies not in never having fallen, but in the ability to rise again without losing one's dignity. Ultimately, the story affirms a simple truth that few dare to confront. Humanity is not healed by forgetting pain, but by living on meaningfully. When two broken hearts choose to walk the same path, they don't make each other whole, but they become strong enough to no longer be swallowed by the darkness. And sometimes, just one right choice, staying, standing by, not running away, is enough to change an entire life.